The year is 1939. Europe stands on the precipice of war, a continent exhausted by one global conflict, now staring down the barrel of another. But the invasion of Poland, the spark that ignited this inferno, was not the culmination of Nazi Germany's ambitions. It was merely the first chapter. What lay beyond that initial calculated aggression? What dark currents of geopolitics, economics, and ideology propelled Adolf Hitler and his regime on a relentless, insatiable quest for domination, a quest that would ultimately engulf the world? This is the untold story of Germany's expansionist fever, a chilling examination of the motivations, the miscalculations, and the devastating consequences that reshaped the global order forever. The seeds of this expansion were sown in the fertile ground of German resentment and a warped vision of destiny. The Treaty of Versailles, a punitive peace imposed upon Germany after World War I, was a festering wound. It stripped the nation of territory, crippled its economy with crippling reparations, and perhaps most humiliatingly, forced it to accept sole blame for the war. For many Germans, this was an unbearable injustice, a national humiliation that begged for rectification. Into this void of despair and anger stepped Adolf Hitler, a charismatic orator who tapped into this potent brew of grievance, promising a return to national pride, economic prosperity, and a glorious, expansive future. His ideology, Nazism, was built on a foundation of extreme nationalism, virulent anti-Semitism, and a profound belief in the superiority of the Aryan race. Central to this worldview was the concept of Lebensraum, or living space. Hitler envisioned a vast German empire stretching eastward, dominating Eastern Europe and absorbing the lands and resources of what he considered to be racially inferior Slavic peoples. This wasn't merely about acquiring territory. It was about creating a racially pure, self-sufficient Reich, a 1,000-year empire that would dwarf any in history. This was the ideological bedrock of his expansionist policies, a driving force that transcended mere political or economic expediency. But ideology alone does not fuel armies. Economic imperatives played a crucial, though often intertwined, role. Germany, stripped of its industrial heartlands and colonies after World War I, was struggling to rebuild. Hitler's regime prioritized rearmament and the creation of a war machine capable of achieving his ambitious goals. This required vast resources: coal, iron ore, oil, and foodstuffs. The annexed territories and subsequent conquests were seen not just as strategic gains, but as essential economic assets, vital for sustaining the German war effort and achieving autarky, economic self-sufficiency, free from the dictates of international markets and potential blockades. The drive for Lebensraum was inextricably linked to the need for raw materials and agricultural land to feed and arm a growing German population and its military. The military doctrine of Blitzkrieg, lightning war, was the operational manifestation of this expansionist drive. Developed in the interwar years, it was a revolutionary approach to warfare, emphasizing speed, surprise, and concentrated armored thrusts, supported by overwhelming air power. It was designed to shatter enemy defenses, bypass static fortifications, and achieve rapid, decisive victories. This doctrine was not just a tactical innovation, it was a reflection of Germany's strategic ambitions. Blitzkrieg allowed for the swift conquest of territory, minimizing the risk of a protracted war of attrition that Germany, with its limited resources, could not afford. It was the perfect tool for Hitler's rapid territorial grabs, allowing him to present the world with faits accomplis, accomplished facts, before his adversaries could fully mobilize and react. The invasion of Poland in September 1939 was the pivotal moment. It was not an isolated act of aggression, but a calculated step in a much larger, more ambitious plan. Poland, strategically located, was both a territorial stepping stone and a symbolic target. Its conquest would secure Germany's eastern flank and provide the initial Lebensraum Hitler craved. But crucially, it was the international reaction, or rather the lack thereof, that emboldened Hitler to continue his relentless advance. The Allied powers, primarily Britain and France, had pledged to defend Poland. Yet their response was, to say the least, inadequate. The Phony War, a period of relative inactivity on the Western Front after the invasion of Poland, was a stark illustration of their hesitation and miscalculation. They underestimated Hitler's resolve, his ruthlessness, and the sheer speed and effectiveness of the Blitzkrieg. They hoped for a negotiated peace, clinging to the illusion that appeasement might still prevail. This diplomatic failure, this paralysis of will, was a critical factor that fueled Germany's continued expansion. Hitler saw not a unified front of determined opposition, but a divided and hesitant Europe, ripe for further exploitation. The fall of France in the spring of 1940 was a seismic shock. The swift and humiliating defeat of a major European power demonstrated the terrifying efficacy of Blitzkrieg and shattered the illusion of Allied invincibility. It opened up Western Europe to German domination, granting Hitler access to vital industrial capacity, strategic ports, and valuable resources. The Battle of Britain, though ultimately a defensive victory for the Allies, showed that German land conquest could be halted, but it came at a tremendous cost and did not deter Hitler from his long-term strategic aims. Beyond the immediate military objectives, Germany's expansionist policies were driven by a long-term strategic vision. Hitler sought to establish a continental hegemony, a German-dominated Europe free from British influence and Soviet Bolshevism. He envisioned a vast empire that would control the resources of Eastern Europe and pose a formidable challenge to the United States. The war was not just about conquering land, it was about fundamentally reordering the global balance of power, a radical reshaping of alliances and spheres of influence. The invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, codenamed Operation Barbarossa, was the ultimate expression of this expansive ambition and ideological fanaticism. It was a gamble of unprecedented proportions, opening a vast eastern front and committing Germany to a two-front war it could not realistically win. Yet for Hitler, it was a necessary undertaking. He saw the Soviet Union as the embodiment of Bolshevism, an ideological enemy that had to be destroyed, and its vast territories and resources as the ultimate prize of Lebensraum. This was a war of annihilation, driven by racial hatred and a messianic vision of German destiny. The military doctrines employed in this colossal struggle were tested to their limits. While Blitzkrieg proved devastatingly effective in the initial stages, the sheer vastness of the Soviet Union, its harsh climate, and the resilience of the Red Army ultimately ground down the Wehrmacht. The logistical challenges were immense, and the war devolved into a brutal attritional struggle that Germany was ill-equipped to sustain. The economic implications of Operation Barbarossa were profound. Germany sought to exploit the Soviet Union's resources to fuel its war machine and sustain its population. But the scorched earth tactics employed by the Soviets and the relentless fighting meant that the anticipated economic windfall was never fully realized. Instead, the campaign became a colossal drain on German resources, both human and material. Culturally, the Nazi regime sought to impose its ideology and racial policies on the conquered territories. The systematic persecution and extermination of Jews and other minority groups were central to Hitler's vision of a racially pure Lebensraum. This policy of genocide, a chilling manifestation of Nazi ideology, left an indelible scar on the continent and a profound indictment of the human capacity for evil. The reactions and miscalculations of the Allied powers continued to shape the course of the war. While initially hesitant, the sheer brutality of the Nazi regime and the existential threat it posed eventually galvanized them. The Soviet Union's entry into the war, despite its brutal initial losses, provided a crucial second front and tied down vast German forces. The United States' entry into the war after the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941 transformed the conflict into a truly global struggle, bringing its immense industrial and military might to bear against the Axis powers. The long-term strategic aims that led to this global conflict were multifaceted and deeply rooted in the Nazi worldview. It was about racial purity, territorial expansion, economic self-sufficiency, and the establishment of a new world order dominated by Germany. It was a vision fueled by a dangerous cocktail of resentment, ideology, and a thirst for power, a potent brew that would ultimately consume millions and irrevocably alter the course of human history. The legacy of this relentless expansionist drive continues to resonate today. The redrawing of borders, the rise and fall of empires, the enduring impact of ideological conflict, these are all echoes of that tumultuous period. Understanding the geopolitical, economic, and ideological forces that drove Nazi Germany's expansion beyond Poland is not merely an academic exercise. It is a vital lesson in the dangers of unchecked ambition, the insidious power of ideology, and the catastrophic consequences of appeasement and miscalculation. It is a reminder that history, in its grandest and most terrible moments, is a story of human agency, of choices made and paths taken, with consequences that ripple through generations. The world we inhabit today is, in no small part, a product of that catastrophic ambition and the global conflagration it ignited.